Check, check. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming to Hackathought. This has been a really amazing project that has occurred over many months, and a lot of student engagement has happened over the course of this project. I'm Chris Fitzgerald. I'm the Hackathon coordinator. So I wanted to introduce Greg Frankson, who's going to kick off the panel. Greg is our poet in residence. He has been a mental health advocate since 2007. So I will let Greg talk a bit more about his experience and talk about mental health and well-being overall. Everybody welcome Greg.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everyone. How are you doing this evening? Good? That's terrific. Are you guys ready for a weekend of mental health awesomeness? Because I most certainly am, and I feel very privileged to be here with you this evening and to be rejoining you again on Sunday and being able to, at that point, share some of the work that you all have done, but share it back to you as poetry. So that's my role, is to listen, to observe, and to take note, and then to share back that work with you. So I'm excited to see how this goes and to see what the process will be for all of you, and to see the final outputs as well. So this is fantastic. So as was mentioned in my introduction, my name is Greg Frankson. My poetry stage name is Ritalin, but you don't need to remember that. As was mentioned by Chris, I have been doing spoken word as mental health advocacy since 2007. I'm also a national championship slam poet, and I've been doing all kinds of weird and funky fun things as a product of my involvement with social issues, especially mental health, which is one of my key things. But I don't want to bore you with my bio, because that's not really why we're here. What we're here for is to talk about issues and themes around the idea of mental health. And so I'd like to begin with some poetry. Now, as was mentioned, in 2007, I began my advocacy when I was asked to be the poet in residence at the International Initiative for Mental Health Leadership Conference that was held in Ottawa. And at that event, we did an opening ceremony at what was then called the Museum of Civilizations in Gatineau. And the opening theme was on Indigenous peoples from all of the different countries who were in attendance. And so the poem that I wrote for that event is the one that I'd like to start with today. One, because of its relevance to my work in mental health, but secondly, and more importantly, because I think it's very important that we always remember and acknowledge, no matter what we're doing, that the place where we reside is not originally our territory. And so I like to pay respect and acknowledge the fact that we are on the territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit, and I am thankful and grateful for their kindness in allowing me to live here. And so this poem that I'm going to do in tribute to the Indigenous of Canada is called Grand Entry. And for anyone who's ever attended a powwow, you'll know that at the beginning of the powwow, the men who are playing and singing on the drum are joined in the center of the parade area, where all of the people who are going to participate come in a big long procession. They form a circle and dance and sing together as a form of welcome and as a form of introduction. And so I'd like to welcome you here to this wonderful event and welcome you into the world of my spoken word with the poem Grand Entry. And it goes like this. In the heart of Kanata, by the edge of the river, planted in Turtle Island, feel the beat of the drum. Traditional expression of the depth of the culture, moving into the circle that's surrounding the drum. The dancers fancy shawling, and the singers are calling to the beauty that's within us and responding to the drum. Invited to be in it, all our cultures join bring together, and the unity created when the people start to come inspires understanding, commonality of purpose, dedication to the service of the people of the drum. First Nation land beneath us, multicultural in nature. We in Canada are welcome now to come and join the drum. The drum, the drum. The rhythm of the drum was the heartbeat of this nation from the day it was begun. And at the final moment when all life on earth is done and the oceans turn to salty beds beneath the burning sun, the drum, the passion of the drum will continue to reverberate long after we succumb. Beyond that final moment, after all that we've become, then the land will surely echo with the silence of the none. The drum, the power of the drum is the universal language at the tips of all our tongues. So at the present moment, all together, everyone, in the name of global healing, let's pay homage to the drum. First Nation land beneath us, multicultural in nature. We in Canada are welcome now to come and join the drum. The dancers fancy shawling and the singers are calling to the beauty that's within us and responding to the drum. Traditional expression of the depth of the culture, moving into the circle that's surrounding the drum in the heart of Kanata, by the edge of the river, planted in Turtle Island. Feel the power of the drum. The drum, the rhythm of the drum in the heart of Kanata. Feel the power of the drum. The drum, the passion of the drum, planted in Turtle Island. Feel the beat of the drum. Thank you. In the last 7 years, I've had the opportunity to travel across Canada, south of the border and overseas, as an advocate for the improvement of mental health systems, both domestically and abroad, to create a truly global system of care to take care of people who have requirements around the state of their brains. And in the process of doing this kind of work, I have been really lucky and privileged and blessed to have the opportunity to sit with people like yourselves who are interested in being a part of the creation of that change, to sit with people who are involved on the medical and clinical side of the issue, to speak to carers and family members who are in direct support of people who are living with mental illnesses, and of course, and most importantly, to spend a great deal of time around listening to and sharing the stories of people who live with mental illnesses. And in the process of doing that, a couple things happened that were very interesting in my life. In 2007, at the conference that I mentioned before, I shared all of my poems, and by the end of this time, in that 72-hour period, I came from a person who arrived there knowing almost nothing about mental illness and the issues around mental health, to being a passionate mental health advocate. Because that's how powerful the stories are and how real the issues are if we're ever going to get to a place where people can feel like their emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental well-being are all being taken care of as a holistic, in a holistic approach. So I was able to do that through that experience, but something else happened very shortly thereafter. And a member of my family, a teenager, teenage member of my family, was diagnosed with concurrent disorders and then had to try to access the youth mental health system. So I became a family member in support of a person living with a mental illness. And then in the spring of 2011, I was diagnosed with depression. And so then all of a sudden, I was on the receiving end of treatments, of pharmaceuticals, of all of these different things. One of the things that I can tell you with absolute certainty is that you all know someone who lives with a mental illness. 100%. And in the process of us figuring out what that actually means on a societal level, we have to come to a certain set of conclusions. Number one, the health of the entire nation is not possible until we acknowledge that mental health needs to be treated as seriously as physical health. Number two, we have to stop making the false distinction between mental health and physical health entirely. Because if you have an illness in your brain, isn't your brain a part of your body? So this tendency to disembody people who are living with mental health issues, we need to stop doing that and look at the entire thing holistically. And then the third conclusion that we can draw after we've made those two steps is that there can never be a truly healthy society that does not acknowledge those two realities. So let's move towards a truly healthy society. And this event that's happening this weekend that you all are here a part of, this is just one of the very important steps that we have to make in order to make that a reality. So thank you for being part of that. I'm going to share a couple more poems with you. This next one is sorry? Yeah. Okay. This poem is a relatively short piece, and it is about what it is like to live with mental illness. The beautifully brave are like brittle birch bark bent by blows, born with breath bated, barely able to maintain emotional communion with the vibrations innate to their souls. And when pressure exerted on their reed of society bends it to the breaking point and no other option remains, they snap. Like the click of a camera shutter locks the scream of a child defiled by napalm in the jungles of Vietnam into the trauma center of memory, they snap. Like defeated legacies of arms, extremities buckle under stress as force of impact shatters the weak who lack backbone, they snap. Like the tenuous connections of neural endings pressed beyond the limits of comfort as the mind is assaulted by relentless past torments, they snap. Like the crackling pop of leather strap against prepubescent skin, crispy as the words chewing out raw hide, they snap. Because they have no choice. Because cohesiveness and wholeness are sad replacements for holding it all together when falling apart is a better way to cast this compound fracture. The broken need a break from breaking. So they snap, just so they can finally be still. Thank you. Finally, this event is not just about talking about mental health in a broad kind of way. This is about looking at the issue and coming up with innovative ways to address it through the use of very cool stuff that I cannot build myself. I am very impressed that there is a room full of people who will come up with the kinds of applications that you all are going to come up with. So the last piece that I'm going to do for you is hopefully to inspire you to come through and create some very interesting things and to operate off the spark of creativity that I'm sure has already started to smolder in your brains. So this last piece is called Ignite, and I leave it for you, and I look forward to seeing what you all come up with over the course of the weekend. This last piece goes like this. Spark the light, ignite. Heat up the atmosphere in Kelvin, Celsius, and Fahrenheit. Dance and cast shadows as scorched leaves and wood flicker, and the crowd around the bonfire grows thicker and thicker. Share tales of yore passed down from generation to generation to warm up your thoughts and set alight imagination. When you breathe, feel the burn of ashes in your lungs. Feed the fire you feel inside. Your conflagration just begun. Singe the embers that stir the sky with every spin, strum, sachet, and stroke. Wherever you first notice fire, it's always signaled by smoke. It carries memories of solidity before fuel converts to flame. Looks down upon the gathering, reflects upon from whence it came. Oh. That's unusual. Down the run from whence it came. I seem to have completely lost the poem, folks. Ah. Whence it came. Ascends one's freed from inhibition. So that's an example we should heed while shaft-lit incendiary burns at a flame-lit constant speed. Shake the dust from your clothing. Use your singular voice to blend with the chorus before us. Make inflammatory choice. Spark the light. Ignite. Stir the blood in your palms to create flows of creativity through circulated bombs. Flow flips from feeble to fire starter. Blackened hearts seared in flame. When forged in such heat, you can never be the same. Singe to char every last fear. Vaporize tears from your eyes. Burn bright enough to endear you to the dawn as you rise. To inspire, we must burn like stars. To inspire, we must light. Oh my good God. To inspire, we must. Something like stars, burn celestial bright. Melt excuses with the flames when you feel the moment is right. Seize the space to find cleansing through creative delight and share it with hopeful abandon to everyone with insight. And for those beyond your hand's grasp, burn fury etch deep into their palms. Energy the artistic you emits enriches like spiritual alms. Whether you dance, paint, sculpt, sing, play, act, write, or recite, when your passions ignite, shine when you spark your light. I'm sorry, guys. That rarely happens. So in order to keep us moving towards where we need to be, I'm going to introduce two gentlemen who are here from the Center for Addictions and Mental Health and Addictions. Good God, what's wrong with my brain today? The Center for Addictions and Mental Health. There you go. CAMH's education section. Please welcome up to the front, David Wilger and Andrew Johnson.
Let's hear it again for Greg. Woo! I couldn't do one line of that, so, it just amazes me that you got through. I've seen you do it 3 times. First time I've ever seen you stumble, and I'm always flabbergasted that anybody can pull that off. So I hope you're all as inspired by Greg as I have been over the years. And when I see what Greg does, one of the things I think of is courage. And the courage not only to stand up and perform, but the courage to take a stance and say, this is what I'm going to be about. And so one of the things I'd like to thank all of you for the courage to come here and to have a blank page and to work with us and to create. And I hope you're sparked to that creation. So my name's David Wilger. I'm the Senior Director for Education at CAMH. And I have to say that, first of all, I'm just thrilled that you're all here. So thank you all for being here. About a year ago, we had an idea for a project. The team came to me and they said, we want to do a project. I said, great. I said, what are you going to do? They said, we don't know. So what do you mean you don't know? So we have this idea, we're going to bring people together and they're going to tell us what we should do. And I said, okay, but what are you going to do? I don't know. Well, how much is it going to cost? A lot. Okay, but what are you going to do? Well, we don't know. So we put together a grant. We told the government, we're going to do something. What are you going to do? We don't know. And but what we're going to do is we're going to invite a whole lot of very creative, very smart people together, and they're going to tell us what we should do. We're going to challenge them with some very big challenges, and together we're going to solve the problem. And so we're here for you, and we appreciate that you're here for us, and I think we're going to have a great weekend together. Just a couple of things that I hope you'll keep in mind over the weekend. So one number, 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 people live with mental illness, and that means that everybody in this room knows somebody, as Greg said, and so it's everybody's problem. Another number that I want you to remember is 20. For me, 20 is much more important than the number 42. The number 20 is the number of years that people with serious mental illness don't live. They live 20 years on average less than the average. And why? Because of what Greg talked about. One of the reasons is access to services. And we're here today to try to tackle some of those issues around access to services. So welcome you. I thank you for your work. I will be around today, tomorrow. I look forward to see what you come up with over the weekend. And my friend and colleague Andrew is going to get down to the specifics because he's the one who told me that he didn't know what we were going to do. I'm still confused. I've been confused for a year, so I'm going to let him solve some of those riddles for me.
Thanks very much, David. My name's Andrew Johnson. I manage a program of client and family education at the Center for Addiction Mental Health. And I was one of the folks that wrote that grant. So, of course, we didn't say, well, we don't entirely know what we're going to do. What we did, though, was we wrote a grant that was about engagement. So that is that we are bringing together all through the process, all through the project, people together to collaborate, to think through common problems, and to propose solutions. So this is really consistent with the ethos of the whole project. The problems that we're approaching, though, were this. So we applied to a grant called the Mental Health Innovation Fund. And that fund is focused on the needs of post-secondary students in Ontario. So this is a starting point. So what are the problems with post-secondary students in Ontario around mental health, mental illness, and addictions? So we're thinking about how do they access services? That is, they move to a new town, they want to know something about wellness services. That is, I don't know, go to a family doctor, go to a yoga studio, go to a park. They run into some problems. I need to go see somebody to deal with my anxiety, my depression. I think my best friend is psychotic. Whatever these things are, they don't quite know where to go. And it's exacerbated by the fact, it's made worse by the fact that the way that we fund and the way that we understand many of our services, there's a split between things that are on campus and things that are in the community. This is getting better, but we're not quite there. So these are the kind of problems that we're trying to solve. So when we engaged our students to start working with us, the basic idea was, well, why don't we build a map? And that map should be able to tell people things about their community. And so we wanted to map, and my thought spot is just basically a gigantic map of the GTA that's mapping all the kinds of services that I talked about. It's about 2,000 of them now from end to end to end to end of the city. So it's a nice starting spot. But what our big dream with this project is to really do a few other things, which is to make it really accessible. So hence the idea around mobile. We want people to be able to not have to think about, what does my buddy think about me calling up a service? I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Or I'm going to find these services for myself because I need to. And I don't want to have to necessarily talk to anyone else about it. So hence mobile. Or, you know what, this is my way of engaging with the world. Again, this is, you of course know where we're at with all of that. I mean, this is just the way that people communicate. These are the tools they have in front of them. Second is we want to, this is based on Ushahidi's mapping framework, software, and platform, I should say. And we know that it's scalable. So we would love to be able to make a map that doesn't just deal with the GTA, but deals with folks in Windsor, folks in Ottawa, folks in Thunder Bay, wherever they are. One of the problems we don't know how to solve is, should we have my thought spot Windsor, my thought spot Thunder Bay, my thought spot Kingston? Or could we really stretch and think, because it's scalable, could we do my thought spot that will get me to these various spots, so that wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, you can get the information that you need, the services that you need, as quickly and seamlessly as possible. And the other thing, and this is more the kind of the inspirational or whatever, by talking about this and by thinking about this, we're encouraging you to think about your mental health. What is mental health? Because it gets confused with mental illness too quickly. That is, we don't pause to think, what is it? When I feel great, do I have good mental health? Well, sometimes I think we should just celebrate it, and we should find ways to cultivate it. But when things go awry, we need to be able to not worry about our internalized, what we in the biz call stigma, or the kind of negative, prejudicial kinds of ideas that we have around mental illness. And this is one of the tools that we hope will start to do that. This won't be everything, but if we can use this kind of engagement strategy and these kind of tools that we're working with to address some of our own negative attitudes around mental illness that just get in the way, I think we'll really have done a big service. Thank you so much for coming.
So now I'd like to invite Eugenia and Melissa to come up and introduce the panel and introduce the evening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eugenia Canas. I come from Mind Your Mind. My colleague Melissa as well. Mind Your Mind is a national engagement program that partners young people and clinicians or anybody who serves them to create resources that fight the stigma of mental health, converge technology and psychoeducation, and provide opportunities for all these wonderful things that we've been talking about. We want to dive into the making, and we want to acknowledge what you brought, whether you brought an idea, a line of code, a platform, or a blank slate to play with over the weekend. And to do that, we want to sit with you for a while and dive into the concerns of the content of this type of work. So to do that, we've convened a pretty amazing panel that spans from service delivery to post-secondary concerns in education, face-to-face work with young people. And I want to invite them to the front to join us for a conversation. It's a conversation that stands between us and food. So we're going to have a diverse set of questions that we ask, and we're probably going to be limited to about 1.5 minutes per answer. The questions are targeted, and we're probably going to reserve Q&A for later or for individual questions. So what I ask of you as you listen is to consider that kernel that you brought in the room and also pass it through the filter of the content expertise that you'll hear through the next little while. First of all, I'll just ask you guys to introduce yourselves and just very, very briefly say where you're coming from. Maybe we can begin over there where the mic is, Joel. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Alicia, and I guess very quickly, I too am a mental health advocate, and people call me a mental health superhero.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joel. I'm the president of the Graduate Architecture, Landscape, and Design Student Union at the University of Toronto. So I'm a student like many of you. And our union in the last 2 years has been focusing on mental health as an issue for our body and our membership.
Hi everyone, my name is Terry McQuaid and I am the Director of Counseling and Accessibility Services at Seneca College and also a psychologist.
My name is Mark Hennick. I'm a mental health advocate and speaker, and I'm the program manager for a program called Mental Health Works at CMHA Ontario.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Jason Goodman. I'm a former special educator, and I'm currently working with Tux Design co-founders. We work with social impact startups to build their business through design for social impact ideas.
Hi everyone, my name is Raju. I'm the manager of the Youth Addiction and Concurrent Disorders Service at Center for Addiction and Mental Health. That's a mouthful. And I'm very excited to be here. I'm a social worker by training and now a manager.
Thank you, Raju. We'll start with the first question. We'll let Melissa lead.
All right. So this question's to Mark, Terry, and Alicia. So how has the way that we talk about youth mental illness changed in recent years? How does this affect treatment?
I was just handed a mic, so I guess that means I'm going first. So I started doing this in high school when, after dealing with my own mental health problems throughout late elementary school, throughout junior high school, and into early high school, I wanted to talk about some of these experiences with my peers. This was, oh God, it was almost 10 years ago now, but anyway, that's not that long ago. But when I did that, when I spoke up and I said that I wanted to tell my peers that I had thought about suicide and that I had attempted suicide, the vice principal told me, no, we don't do that in school, because when you talk about suicide, it gives people the idea to go out and do it. I tried to clarify for her that's not really how it works. But since then, being involved as a mental health advocate and as a speaker, I've been seeing a gradual but definite change in how we talk about it. People don't, to the same extent that they used to just 10 years ago, still believe that we can't talk about suicide in the same way anymore. We hear many, many more conversations about these types of issues, as well as the more everyday issues like depression, a common cold of mental illnesses, and anxiety and stress. This is part of our common language now, I think.
Thank you, Mark.
My thoughts on that are, it used to be when somebody would come forward and it would suggest that they had mental health, or they said in some circle that there was some mental illness going on, that there would be a judgment of that youth. So all of a sudden the youth with all kinds of promise would become the youth who wouldn't get to go anywhere, who didn't have any goals, who obviously must have come from a poor family, or all kinds of labels, or those kind of people look like that. So I think we've come from that place where it's not said publicly in the way that it used to many years ago. And the second part of that question, in terms of how has that shaped treatment, I mean, there's all kinds of pockets of treatment everywhere, but I'm not necessarily sure that the style in which we provide treatment has kept up with the ways that young people like to receive service. So like in my day, sitting down and talking with someone, that was defined as treatment, and it was, in some circles it was pretty cool, but it was pretty hush-hush because you didn't want anyone to know. But youth today aren't necessarily wanting to sit in a room one-on-one with someone. They want to access support and service in a different kind of way.
Thank you, Terry.
So the best way I know how to answer this is from personal experience, and I'm a bit of a geek. So one of what I will share with you is actually something from The Simpsons. So growing up with lived experience, my first idea of what it meant to be quote unquote crazy was the cat lady from The Simpsons who threw cats at people. And it was a very scary imagery. And I think for when I was growing up, and when many of us in this room were growing up, I think the idea of cat ladies, the idea of serial killers, and the idea of very scary people who were not productive members of society, that's what mental illness was to us. And I think what's kind of changed is that people now are curious about it. They're asking questions about it, and they want to help. And when I talk about mental health superhero, what I'm talking about is my personal journey from when I saw bad things and scary things and thinking that people were going to think I was a serial killer. I felt like Spider-Man. I felt like I was living two different lives, and the one that I was living, I was trying to keep the one I was living at night away from my family and friends and people who loved me. And they knew I was lying to them, and they knew that something was hidden and it wasn't working. And what I was hoping for people is that we would live more lives, that we were superheroes that didn't wear masks. So people like Iron Man, and people knew that you were doing something. You're fighting your own personal bad guys. And yeah, it might affect them, but they were resilient and they appreciated you for your strength. In terms of treatment, I would just say that youth today, with us today with social media, I think it's changing treatment because we have a voice, more of a voice than we ever did before. And we're not going to sit back and take it and we're not just going to do something because that's what somebody older than us had to do when they were growing up. There actually is a much stronger voice and a power to change, and you've seen that through a lot of amazing apps and pieces of technology that have been released in the last 5 to 6 years.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That brings us to why you're here today, what interested you, and also from your perspective as post-secondary school students. So what I want to ask of the panel now, and this question is for Terry, Raju, and Joel. And Raju, I will hand you the mic first, because you're here. The question is, in what ways does the post-secondary school journey put pressure on the mental health of students?
I think most of the people in this room today could probably answer that question better than I can. But I think developmentally speaking, so for many people that go through the typical developmental phases, university or college, post-secondary is a time of extreme change and transition, which you guys all know, and we all know from our experiences. But it's a time when you're trying to find your place in the world. So just that on its own is a huge journey and a huge undertaking without even considering some of the mental health implications that can take place. I think the other things that come into place, you know, people move from a pretty protective environment for most folks to maybe less protection, less structure, and may not always have all the coping skills you need to figure out how to prioritize things, how to deal with new peer groups, trying new substances. This is all of what kind of takes place in this environment. And I think something else that complicates or can add to this post-secondary school journey is the foundation that you're coming in with. So if you're coming in with a foundation where, let's say there's some mental health issues in the family, so there's a genetic history, you're coming in with maybe not such a great support network, and some other life issues that have taken place, you know, you could have had some losses or anything else, that certainly adds to the layers in a young person's life or anyone in post-secondary school. So I think those are some of the implications.
Thank you, Raju.
So I'm going to answer this one pretty personally just because I am in the middle of this post-secondary education journey. I'm in the last year of my thesis of my master's, so it's been 7.5 years of school so far. And really, when we think about it, one of the things that happens in this journey that really puts stress on people is life still happens even when you're in school. And sometimes we go into careers where there might be people you encounter, maybe a professor, maybe a supervisor, a coordinator, that their expectations is that you live, breathe, and work only your university work. You know, I come from a discipline, architecture, where we're expected to stay 80 hours in the same building in a week, you know, where the all-nighter is actually celebrated as a sign of courage, right? And so, you know, we say, oh, I've been up for 2 days in a row. How amazing is that? And there's not a reflection of what that's doing to you and to the people around you. And you're not just putting stress on yourself. You end up affecting the people around you. And this is something that I think it really happens in university in this period of like intense knowledge towards one area. You know, you're so super focused. You start to forget that there's other things in life.
Thank you, Joel.
One of the things we have learned over the years is that somewhere between, I mean, they say 18 to 26, but I think even 17 to 28 or so, there's this underlying bubble for mental illness that happens for people. And if you think about that age gap, that's the same age gap where students are coming into school for the first time. So maybe, you know, there's been little signs or symptoms of something that's been happening for you where you're not quite feeling yourself, or perhaps, you know, something more drastic happens. And in my own case, it was kind of in the middle of those two things. You know, post-secondary school, as we've all just talked about, is a lot of stress. From the workload that you have to the expectations that you have of yourself to do well, whether it's to get your family out of, you know, their lived experience of what they have, you want to move the family forward. You look at the media and you see, you know, the successful person is, right? And you're trying to live up to that. Or you want to be the person to do the next great thing because you want to feel meaningful. And all of those things compounded with the fact that there's a vulnerability for mental illness in that age range. that's a lot of pressure. And I'll just say, generally speaking, for me, as my issues with mental illness bubbled in the early part of my training, you don't have the coping skills. And probably most of us in I'm guessing, our age range, you didn't come out and say you were struggling. I think one of the other exciting things about tonight is that there is more of an open platform to say, I'm struggling. Now we're trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of the people that are struggling and create more of a universal environment for people to feel supported and well.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, our next question is for Jason, Alicia, and Joel. So how can we define post-secondary well-being when the issues that students face are really divergent? So first-year students, grad students, students on academic probation, how do we deal with all those different issues?
I think when you're talking about mental health wellness, and I think one of the things that happens a lot in post-secondary and recently has been highlighting these crises and this horrible thing, and people reacting to only talking about mental health when there's only a suicide, or talking about mental health when something really terrible happens. And I think that's not fair. It's not fair to each of us, and we all have experiences with stress. And I think what we really need to be talking about is how to make a healthier learning environment for everyone. How to look at the learning environments, how to look at things like all-nighters and professors and the way that they teach and how they don't act supportive. And just to give you an example of this, how many of you in your classes have heard this statement? Look to your left, look to your right. Half of you will not be here at the end of the semester. That is not healthy, and it's also completely not necessary. It's not, and I think there's little changes we can look at how we teach and what we expect of our students that can make a big difference, regardless if you're a first-year international graduate student, and just basically examine that and think about is because it's the way that our professors did it, is that the best reason to keep doing something, or are we going to innovate and continue changing and make education better for the next generations?
Thank you, Alicia.
I kind of want to echo what was just said, but also take into consideration, I mean, this definition of kind of university students, I think the only thing we all have in common is that we go to university. But we are such a wide age group. There are people who are 16 in university. There are people who are 70 years old and are in university. There are international students, there are domestic students, there are grad students. There's just about everything you can imagine, right? That goes to university. Everyone is part of life. And we also kind of have to extend that it's more of an environment. I would say that beyond students, faculty are also part of the same pressures. The staff at the university, administrative staff, are also part of the same culture. And so it's more about understanding that university culture and how can we make a healthier university culture. One of the great things about university is that they are supposed to be what society looks towards as good models, right? We're supposed to be ethical. We don't do things because we just want to. We don't do it out of politics. We do it because we do research and we know this is the right thing and we've all talked about it and we debate and we discuss. So it makes sense that a healthier university environment, whatever that means, whether it is more social spaces, whether it's more park spaces, whether it's a different pedagogy, is what we need to be discussing. So it sets a model for the rest of society of what are healthier environments and what can foster better mental health.
Thank you.
That's a great point. I think in continuing the conversation around the mental health environment and making it a place that's good for us all, I think in special education, we've solved this problem a long time ago, especially in elementary education. We understand in special education, when we're teaching children with different learning difficulties or mental challenges and disabilities, we develop an individual educational plan that's multidisciplinary with people from occupational therapy, speech therapy, the school psychologist, the parents. We involve everybody, and it's this magical, wonderful moment where everyone's at the table and we're all thinking about that one individual. The problem is that to be able to realize that on a post-secondary level, you have to start accepting some realities around things like constructivism, which is just a perspective that says we're all different. So regardless of cultural backgrounds, it doesn't matter. Even every single one of us here has our own realities that nobody can understand. We're that complex. And so the problem becomes scale, right? So as you start to get more students, and even mainstream elementary schools, you say, okay, I have 30 students. Well, as a teacher, how am I supposed to develop individual educational plans for all these 30 students? It's impossible. And so how can I help how can I help identify problems that people are facing? How can I identify, and help those children? And that scales up into university. And so in the ed tech space, and I want to bring this back to a design perspective, because I know you were all about to dive into that, right? You have to think about those user scenarios and those use cases and those moments in time. It's not about designing for a demographic. It's not about designing for a cohort or for people who are depressed. It's about designing for moments in time. Right? Because that moment in time when someone's breaking down and when they're so sad or when they're having a manic episode, those moments are complex. And so any digital application that you're going to design, that's a big challenge, right? You got to think about those specific moments. So it's a big challenge for post-secondary. And they are aware of it and they're trying to personalize things more, but they're slow moving. So
Thank you, Jason. I think this gives you a sense of the kinds of approaches and thinking and heart that's invested in our content panelists. I'd like to make sure that you make eye contact with people who have resonated with you. I'd like to invite you to approach them as a resource to continue to ask questions. But for the time being, we also want to know what's in your brains and what you're thinking as you hear this. I'm just wondering if there are any questions from the floor that we can bring forth to. I'm sorry, I just poked you. I see a question. Yes.
absolutely.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Thank you so much for that perspective. Just to recap, because I didn't get to give you the mic on time, we just want to highlight one of the tensions and complexities. Learning disability is another aspect of a complex situation that might arise and might be something that you bring up at that case-by-case moment that Jason suggested we all consider. Thank you. Other questions or comments from the floor? Yes, thank you.
So there's certain social pressures in your post-secondary institution that kind of make you hesitate from coming up with depression or anxiety or stress. How do you combat the cultural stigmas against mental health? And so if you can't really talk about it at school, how do you kind of overcome talking about it with your parents or your family, friends, and whatnot?
I'm going to dive in on this one, I think, if you don't mind. So I think that we have a tendency, somebody mentioned our internalized stigma before. I think we have a tendency to overcomplicate these things. Sometimes we think that we're going to be judged based on the stigmatizing messages that we've received from the world all around us. In my experience, there's always kind of been that fear. But then it comes up to the individual, and hopefully there's the social support that facilitates this, but ultimately it's the individual's decision whether or not they're going to disclose that they've struggled. It's our job as a society to try to make that easier for them, but the messaging I think that I try to do, and that many of my colleagues try to do, is to motivate that person that even though it's hard, that we need to speak up anyway. We need to engage these kinds of discussions anyway, because we can't wait for the world to change. We have to change the world.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I want to address this just because I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'll tell you with a little personal experience in that as a faculty, our student union decided to do a mental health survey of our students. And our faculty was not quite happy that we were going to do this, particularly because there was a lot of fear that this would impact negatively on admissions, that this would be seen as a weakness, that this was going to destroy the faculty, our school was going to close down because of this. And the truth was that once we finished the survey and we talked, they all realized, oh, you guys feel exactly the same way we did when we went through school. You have the same problems we did, and we complained too, and we need to do this. And it really is, everyone is thinking the same thing. You know, everyone will be able to relate. We all know someone who's going through mental, and we've all felt issues of mental health. Mental health is a much bigger issue than just the illnesses. And so it's having that confidence that there are other people who are going to understand. And it's uncomfortable at first, but once you open up that discussion, wow, it changes. Like, everyone is open now about it. Everyone's willing to talk.
I'm just going to, can I go? I'm going to add 2 quick points. I think that you bring up a really good point, as everyone here has said. It's one of those things where you're struggling, and we're asking you to work through your struggle, but we're also asking you to be a hero and go out there and champion the cause. And they seem counterintuitive, but as my colleague up here was saying, it's the only way to almost go about it. But the advice that I could give you is to start where it feels safe. So if it feels safe with a professor, if it feels safe talking to a friend, you have to start in the areas where you can make some traction and then expand that dialogue wherever you can kind of take it. So it's important to think about your safety when you're doing that and where you feel comfortable, but it's also important to keep talking about it.
And I guess if I understood part of your question, how do you have those dialogues in some families that are diverse where it's really a taboo subject, for cultural reasons, and sometimes just not understanding what mental illness is, for all the reasons we just talked about. And some of the things that we try to do where I am located is we try to be creative. So it's about finding familiar faces who can tell their story and who've come through on the other side, and so we can support the student to have that dialogue with the parent through that person's story, by having information on our websites that are in multi languages or presented in multi different ways. And it's really about talking to that individual. How do you think, what's the best way to reach your family or to help you reach your family about what's happening for you? And sometimes it's about explaining to the family that the son or daughter can still be a student and still do well, but we need to do A, B, C, and D in order for them to continue to finish through their program. So it's not necessarily saying the person is sick, but coming at it at a different way.
Thank you, Terry. I want to ask for one more question from the floor, if there's such a thing. I'm respecting that everyone's been sitting still for a long time. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. What to each of you would be the perfect support system? So maybe not now, maybe 10, 15, 30, 50 years down the line. What would it look like, both from an education level, from a support system level? Because it's really good to look at the problems now, but it's also important to recognize, like, what are we striving for? And as the people on the front line, I'd love to hear what you think.
I can answer that first. So I think it kind of highlights by the previous question. We do live in this culture of fear, and and sometimes we actually don't give the people around us enough credit. That we kind of we hear some ignorant voices, and sometimes the ignorant voices are the loudest, but they may also be isolated. So I guess for me, what I would like to see in the future would be where more people are supportive and loving, but I think also seeing people who are sick not as problems that need to be treated, but as partners in the future, as in somebody you need to listen to around what choices they want to make about their care, and that there's still people there and they're still incredibly strong and resilient, and the fact that they got up and are still here today means the world. And so I really want to see something where we look at students and we actually listen and we actually put people in partnership in in how we talk about mental health and how they're going to recover from whatever they're going through.
I'm wondering if I can, because I'm actually really excited about that question. So when I think about the future of where we want to be in terms of in the context of mental health, so I do think about technology, but I'm thinking something that, and I use technology or supervise people who implement technology for students. I'm not can I say a tech geek? But I love it. So I'm talking from a novice. So that whatever this is, it's dynamic. So that if I'm the person who is just wanting some support, I can access this piece of technology and I can sort of search for some keywords, to kind of see if I'm in the right place, and touch a button that allows me to talk to somebody in a safe place, but also another button that allows in that moment, as I'm in the safe space talking with these people that are in that space with me, but now I want somebody that I can see, because now I'm feeling distressed. Can I push this button and something flips, so now I can have a face-to-face chat, like you do with the Bell Canada people that say, oh, do you want to talk? So it's an item that's very dynamic and flexible and accessible. And the accessible part is, in the work that I do, I see students who have physical mobility issues, vision issues, hearing issues. So that item needs to be able to interact with accessible technology like JAWS, Zoom text, those kinds of things. So that's the kind of thing that I think about when I think about the future.
And thank you, Terry. That segues me onto the last question. I know that there are a couple more questions from the floor. I see you. The guilt is killing me. However, I've also heard some deep sort of spine sort of breaths that it's time to get up soon. So we'll come back. The last question to everyone on the panel who can answer. It's about talking about the existing digital tools, communities, and resources that already exist. So that there's no duplication, so that we're not working in a siloed way, but we are either disseminating more widely something that already exists, or working to address a gap, something that is not there. But let's talk about what exists already, tools, communities, and resources for students who are seeking help. Got lots of answers, Jason?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of different startups every day and entrepreneurs, and they're always thinking about creating the next big thing, right? And they want to be in front of the conversation, and they want to help facilitate conversations, right? The biggest challenge that you're all going to face when you're thinking about your product ideas is if you really, really care and you want to build something that people are going to use, you have to just accept the realities of the digital universe that we live in. So it may be more powerful for you to think about building a Chrome extension, right? That connects in real time to somebody in a very specific moment, rather than an app that someone needs to go and find and download and then use, because the reality is the number of apps that are downloaded, when you look at the percentage of the ones that aren't, it'll stop you from having any motivation to do it. It's actually very scary, right? And when you look at what's happening on Twitter, my God, if we had some search engine, if we had the ability to use some of the artificial intelligence tools that we're doing, and if you could okay it and allow it, let's say, on Twitter, and say, okay, I know there's a history of manic depression in my family, and I'm going to put the Twitter thing on to say, if my tweets hit a certain level of intensity, or I tweet 1,000 times in 24 hours, that should send a message to my mental health team or my family or my brother or my sister. That's a very powerful way to think about the kinds of solutions that we need, rather than building something from the ground up like Mark Zuckerberg, right?
I think one of the biggest aspects when designing kind of digital tools, and I do this from the perspective of a designer myself, right? I design the built environment and things around us, is to put your design ego aside and understand that sometimes the smallest of things have the biggest of impacts. So when it comes to the resources, there is a lot out there. There's a lot of forums and communities you can join. There's a lot of places where you can ask questions. We used Google to be able to do our survey. We then published it on Issue. We then made it available in PDFs through Twitter and our website. There were tons of tools that were already existing, and we didn't have to invent anything else. But the most important thing is that these are all very collective, anonymous tools, right? They're made for everyone. And so how can you make sure that whatever is being used is personalized to the individual is one of the most important aspects. And, you know, whether it is a survey at the beginning that, you know, questions that get asked throughout that kind of help assess the person and then direct the right kind of resources according to the mood, or, you know, something that connects them that really allows them to personalize the kind of information they are getting. I think that is really the key between bridging kind of the anonymous resources online and the individual who's actually going to be using this.
So in my final year of school, I actually lived in an incubator. And the joke was when they were trying to make fun of the startup space to be like, oh, it's like the next Facebook for cats. The one thing I'm going to say is that what a lot of people said here is true. There's a lot of things done in this space. And there's a lot of amazing work that's happening. What we do not need is any more mood trackers. There's about, last count, I think close to 10 to 15,000 mood trackers on the App Store. And what we also don't need is any kind of new social network for people with mental health concerns or people struggling. Facebook and Twitter do amazing jobs of that, and I don't think people are going to use anything additional on top of those things. And I think, you know, you have a short period of time, and whatever you're going to make is going to make a difference. But I really want to say that a lot of the ways of connecting and a lot of things around mood, those questions have been answered. When you're looking at people who have lived experience and who may be using this tool, the one thing that I would really caution you against is one thing that you learn when you're going through a therapy process is you never ever want to answer any survey question ever again. So please keep it short and sweet if what you're building has anything to do with a survey less than 4 questions.
Thank you, Alicia. And I think that will be how we would transition over to our next step. Thank you again to all the panelists. Once again, do not be shy in approaching them, reaching out. Let's give them a hand. Guys, we're getting up, we're getting a break, we're getting a snack. It's right behind you. We'll convene in how long?
We'll give you guys 15 to 20 minutes. There's food, and you guys can mingle, and then we're setting up this area again.
Thank you.